Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. Today marks, I think, our 7th TICC Talk. And before we get started, I'd like to thank Madeleine Meurer, of course, who organized this call and who made all of this happen. My name is Tobias Gutmann. I'm an assistant professor at EBS. And together with Sven Henkel and Christoph Schneider, we are building a TICC. This is the Institute for Technology, for Innovation and Customer Centricity. And we want to create a discourse between the scholars and the practitioners, between theory and practice. And we always invite inspiring personalities to promote this technology-oriented innovation management. And today we have a special guest here, Dr. Peter Fassbinder. He's a principal expert for product lifecycle management and process innovation. He's focused on topics like agile, lean, or DevOps. He's working at Siemens Advanta Consulting, which is the global management consultancy of one of the world's most innovative engineering and technology companies, Siemens. The title of this TICC Talk is Agile, DevOps and Beyond, How to Stay in the Fast Lane in a Digital World. Thank you, Peter, that you're here with us. For everyone who's online and listening in, the next 50 minutes or 20 minutes, Peter will have a keynote talking about the topic I just mentioned. Then I will ask 2 or 3 questions, but of course, after this Q&A round, we want to open the stage so every one of us and every one of you can ask questions. So use the chat, use the Q&A function, or go just raise your hand and we can have a vivid discussion. With all that being said, Peter, thanks for being here with us today, and I hand over to you.
Yes, thank you very much to everybody. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Tobias, for inviting me. I'm quite happy to present today. And I'm going to talk today, to be mentioned, about Agile, about DevOps, and what I call about something that comes beyond it. And you could argue this sounds like a lineup of buzzwords, but it's actually not. It's more like a journey, and it has a lot to do with just my subtitles, how you can stay in the fast lane in an ever-increasing digital world. Just very briefly, 2 more words on myself. As Tobias already mentioned, I'm a principal expert for the area of PLM process innovation with Siemens Advanta Consulting. And in this roles, I've been driving the lean and agile topics forward for more than 15 years by now. And in the last 5 years, I'm almost exclusively dedicating my time to advancing forward the topics of continuous delivery in DevOps, and especially how they can be applied in an industrial or regulated company like ours is, and probably many of yours potentially as well. I'm also quite active in internal and external networks, conferences, communities. So I'm always quite happy to share our experiences, our thoughts, my ideas, and also to get some feedback on what you see about it. Let's start with Agile. I'm pretty sure that you all know, at least roughly to a certain extent, what Agile means. I think we can probably keep it fairly brief, and I'm also pretty sure that you kind of applying Agile in your organization. So to keep it short in a sense, is Agile is about speed. It's really about being fast. It's about adaptability, to really being in the position to provide the best fitting product for your customers. And it has a lot to do about this flexibility, to be able to react to changing market needs, to changing demands of your customer. So it's really about being in the position that at a specific point in time, you are in a position to really provide the best fitting product for your customer and to the market. And this is something, as I mentioned, I'm pretty sure most companies today are already applying also in our, let's say, more industrial regulated environment to a certain extent. But the caveat is especially this last half sentence, to a certain extent. Because if you dive deeper into it, and if you look at it, and this is really a very common picture across the industry, and if you look especially at some statistics, and here's an example, some figures from the annual State of Agile report from last year, you can see that most companies are only applying it up to a certain level. I mean, on this picture, you can see here 20% answered, we are experimenting with Agile in pockets. And this is perfectly fine, especially if you're starting with a topic. but already more than 50%, 54% said, well, yeah, we use agile practices, but we are still maturing. And only roughly 16% are in the top 2 levels in here. And where you really say our whole organization has a high level of competency in these agile practices, or is even the key driver of their business to really drive the business forward. And that's a pity. I mean, because if you really look at the agile and what is agile supposed to do and what are the benefits promised by the agile approach, you really need to be in those 2 top levels. You really need to move from doing agile in individual teams or in individual projects to being a complete agile organization, or there's also the term of business agility phrased in it. And this is, as I pointed out, where you really want to be in order to really exploit the benefits. And as I pointed out, as you can see from the statistics, and there are many more out of there, yeah, probably most companies say, of course, we do agile, but if you really look close to it, they somehow hit this, you could call it a glass ceiling or whatever you want to call it, this wall, and they are not progressing further, and they have a very, very hard time to move to this high level. But this is really what we need to move forward into this industry and to push the organization forward. Of course, it's a stepwise journey. I mean, you have to start with experimenting in small pockets, in small pilot projects, but eventually you need to scale. And you need to scale horizontally. That means you have larger teams, distributed teams, maybe development or agile applied across different sites. But it also means scaling towards other functions, to involving non-R&D functions in the agile approach. And what is extremely important, you also need to scale vertically, meaning in a sense that you need to go all the way up to the CEO, and equally important to the CFO. And they also need to understand what's behind this agility and what they need to change in the boundary conditions they are setting, and really to move this topic forward until you're eventually a truly agile organization, self-learning organization. And this is not easy. I mean, it's a lot more than really applying agile within teams and just applying Scrum. Of course, this is a nucleus where you start, but then there are many more topics that need to be addressed. You need to look at the culture. You need to address the organization, why the culture. You need to look at all functions, at the complete workforce, basically, and to enable them, advance them, provide the necessary competency. You probably have to rethink the relationship with your customers, with your suppliers, with your partner. Of course, you need also underlying technologies and processes, and you must make adaptations to those. But much more important is really it needs to be ingrained in your organizational or company strategy, this agile approach. And only really by looking at this whole picture and really bringing the agile up to those levels and to the whole organization, you are in a position to move them, as I pointed out, doing agile in teams to being a truly organization. And this is really the critical step in really to become a very successful in this area and to fully exploit the abilities, the capability this agile approach provides to you. Now, topic 2 I want to talk about is DevOps. So what is DevOps and what is the relationship to agile, and why are people like myself, as I pointed out, for more than 5 years now, I'm almost around the clock, I'm dedicating my full time to advance this topic. From a very high level, you could say our world is changing. And with our changing world, we mean the products are changing, the markets are changing, the customer demands are changing. And this is the reason why we also need to rethink the way we are developing, we are delivering, deploying, and also operating our products or services. And what we mean with changing worlds, changing markets, changing products is especially due to the, I call it the boost of digital capabilities. And on this slide, there are 3 important keywords, I would say. First one is software. I mean, within our products, but within your products of all companies these days, we have an increasing amount of software. It can surface in different formats. We have emerging cloud-based solutions, many of those. We have potentially some mobile apps which are part of our overall product or service we are offering. We, of course, have probably a lot of on-premise software products, but we also have probably in many, many companies in the industrial world, if you talk about this, also embedded software. And there are two things common regardless in which industry you are. First of all, the amount of software is increasing across the product suite. And the second, more important one, the value add defined through the software is even increasing more than the lines of code. This is the first point. The second important keyword on this slide is connectivity. I mean, if we provide a cloud solution to our clients, we have the connectivity by default, also fairly similar to the mobile apps. There are frequent updates possible in the App Store, but also for the on-premise and for the embedded systems. For many, many of our products out in the field of your products, there is already connectivity available. And the third point is these sort of, again, some buzzwords, keywords I put on this slide. If you talk about big data, if you talk about artificial intelligence, we have digital twins, we have maybe some edge applications, we have IoT. So although, let's say, the nature of those products is shifting. And if you take all those three things together, this actually means that our products, our services, what we're offering to a client is significantly shifting, and to fully really exploit the opportunities provided by these sort of shifting products based on new technologies, on new opportunities, you really need to rethink the way you are handling, again, the development, delivery, and deployment for those types of products. And this is where DevOps comes into the game. If you ask now, what is DevOps? I can explain a little bit on this picture. We have created here 5 levels from top to the bottom. And typically, at least if you look at an industrial company organization, we would say Agile is associated to the bottom 2 levels. There, the feedback loops are implemented from testing, from a technical point of view, from a product point of view, the product is validated. So there is this feedback loop inherent in this approach in order with the ambition to create a better product and to deliver at a specific point of time with a high quality and really fitting what the customer needs. Now, if you look at DevOps and ask what is DevOps, it's actually the ambition of DevOps goes a lot further. And it's kind of driving this agile approach further in two ways, especially this feedback loop. One of them is to further accelerate the feedback loops for a very high degree of automation in these loops. But the second more important topic is really to bring it, to extend the feedback loop all the way into the operations, into the to the end customer, to the end user who is using the product. So not only having this feedback loop internally, but really bringing it all the way and integrating the real life system, the operation, the end user into this feedback loop. And this is a significant change, and it requires actually a significant investment. A lot of changes need to make this possible. And you can, of course, ask the question, why should you do this investment? Why should companies change things? Why aren't they sort of staying where they are, or potentially just focusing on, let's say, the agile approach in this picture? And I think the question on why can be, from my point of view, nicely answered with this one sentence that I took from Jan Bosch, who has also written some quite interesting books on this topic, and I adapted it slightly. And it basically says, wouldn't it be great if you as a customer, or if your customer, if they would get a product at a specific point in time, and from this point on, over the course of the probably many years they are using the product, it gets better through software updates while they're using it. So typically we get products and eventually they break down and we have to fix them, but we don't really think about a product increasing in value after we bought it. So typically from a, let's say, classical product, it has the highest value the day we buy it, and then we hope that the value stays stable, potentially it decreases. And now we're talking about a vision where we say, hey, we have now products moving in a direction where we have the technical and physical ability to provide relatively frequent updates with a high quality. And by this, we can actually add value to the product the customer is using and he has bought a couple of years ago. So this is, of course, I mean, if you think through it, it's something you would say, yeah, of course, I want to have it, but it must be safely, securely, industrial grade quality. Of course, we are not providing here, we're not talking about doing a simple web page, but we are talking about potentially safety critical products and where a lot of sort of quality is expected. So it is a great vision, but it requires significant change in the way we are working in order to make this possible in a safely, security, and high quality way. And this is such a huge change. And this is also something that the Harvard Business Review recognized at some point in time with an article. This is an article you can read on the internet. And I'm quite happy that I have this at hand because it sometimes helps convincing senior management that we are really facing a tremendous change in here. And in this article, it basically states the continuous development, as they call it, will change organizations as much as Agile did. And I fully agree from what I understand now, after really digging deep for many, many years in this topic, that the step from Agile to continuous delivery, to continuous deployment DevOps is a similar big step as from waterfall to Agile. So I want to make it very clear that DevOps, it's not Agile Plus or Agile with tool support or Agile 20% faster. It's really a second big step because we have now really to break down the wall towards the sort of the end user with these frequent updates. And why is this such a big step? Because if you really move in this direction, you eventually come to the point where you understand that you have to stop thinking projects. You really have to give up the idea of development projects and really focus on the so-called continuous value stream. That you really say, I have a continuous value stream, not only internally, but all the way into the production system, to the end customer, to the end user. And this, in order to make this manageable, operational, to make this feasible, you need to redesign a lot of things in your organizations. You need technologies, potentially you need to change the architecture of your product to make it more modularized. You need tool chains, you need automated test cases, automated delivery pipelines, but this is not sufficient. You also need to think about how do we change our release process? What are decision criteria in the future? We potentially have new tasks, new responsibilities because now we are sort of deploying more frequently, and it goes all the way up to potentially changing the way you sell your products, because if you have these frequent updates, you very likely come up with a solution that it's best with a software as a service or X as a service business model, where you then eventually end up with a subscription fee. So really making this vision of these continuously evolving products a reality, there's a lot of change things you need to change in your organization. And we actually like to phrase it a little bit. In the past, we have sold static products that got sold once and then they stay as they are. Now and in the future, we will more sell fluid products, how we call it, actually meaning that you as a customer, you get something, and by default, this thing that you get at a specific time, by default, it evolves over the time you're using it. And you don't even know yet what it will be in a position to do 5 years from now. And even the company who's selling doesn't know it, because this is an iterative, continuous involvement process. And this is what DevOps continuous delivery is all about, really an underlying, let's say, approach, method to make this vision I just described feasible, possible, and to take care of all the required changes you need to implement to make this operational feasible. Now let's have also a quick look on what I call beyond, what comes maybe even beyond Agile and DevOps. So it's a little bit an outlook into the future, but with all these things, I mean, the future is already here, but it's just not yet equally distributed. So there are certainly already some areas where this has been applied now. And I would like to emphasize 2 areas that we think are really becoming more and more important over the years to come, in addition to the things I just mentioned. The first one is, it all has to do with this data AI increase in these capabilities again in our products. I mean, there was a talk about AI. I think it was the first TICC.TALK a few months ago. There's a lot again happening in this area. There's a tremendous advancements happening on the ability what products can do by utilizing these data-driven and AI-driven capabilities. And now if you think that if you use this from your production system and you combine it with these fast deployment feedback loops I just described in the DevOps world, you can really shift your way, you're advancing your product from a requirements-driven development more to a hypothesis experiment-based enhancement. So you basically say, I come up maybe with A/B testing with different versions, and I really say I do a lot of sort of experiments, and it doesn't mean experiments regarding quality, but experiments regarding the features based on hypotheses. And then you really look at the data that your production system provides. So you really look at the real data, at the figures, and then you utilize this in order to feed it back through. And I think it's clear if you have only like, for example, once a year release, this feedback loop is very slow. So all of these experiment-based enhancement is a very, very slow progress. But if you have it maybe with every sprint for every 2 weeks, you can really fully utilize this in order to exploit the experiment-based things. And the same stuff, same idea applies to artificial intelligence algorithms. That inherently, of course, they need to learn. And this is something that I found quite striking. I'm also dealing a lot with the healthcare organization, and there the Food and Drug Administration is, of course, they provide a very strong regulations that they need to follow. And they realize that with our current regulations, the FDA realized we are not in a position to really advance these AI algorithms. And this is to the disadvantage for the patients. So they basically are at the moment rephrasing the regulations for approvals for AI algorithms in a sense that you can say you provide a certain boundary and you do an initial certification, and then within a certain specified boundary condition, you are allowed to really update your products without reapprovals in this AI algorithm. So what I would like to point out in here, in order to exploit these possibilities, there's a lot of things we need to do internally, of course, but also externally, like regulatory authority. They are changing because they understand there must be a change. And of course, this is also a process that doesn't take overnight. Here we are talking about years that these changes will take place. And this is something that is very important. The second point I see is really very, very important for the future when you talk about all this agile, frequent deployments, DevOps topic. I like to call it continuous everything. Because already today and in the future even more, it's not so much about individual products and services we sell to our customer. It's more about an ecosystem, and this ecosystem then the customer utilizes utilizes some parts of it. And in this ecosystem, we probably have some physical products, we have some software products, we might have some mobile apps, cloud solution, edge applications, maybe even digital twins. We probably have a lot of data and AI algorithm in there. And we have different stakeholders. We have customers, we have suppliers, we have partners. And now if we think about all these frequent updates I just mentioned, advancing these free products, it's more about advancing this whole ecosystem. And this is a very heterogeneous system. We have very different parts in here. So we cannot just say, well, we update the whole ecosystem every 2 weeks or every 2 months. So it's really about finding the best way to orchestrate this whole ecosystem across the different stakeholders, across the different modalities for the optimum benefit for your customers. And this is a huge task that's ahead of it. I mean, even doing these frequent advancements for an individual part of the ecosystem is already requires significant change. And now we're talking about really the complete ecosystem. And we really, as I pointed out, I like the word, need to find the best way to orchestrate this whole thing for the optimal benefit, of course, for the customer. So let me quickly summarize. I talked about 3 topics, about agility, and here especially about the importance to moving from doing agile within teams to really being a truly agile organization in order really to fully exploit the opportunities provided by agility. And this is something that's really, I would say, applicable to or required by every organization, every company already today. I talked about continuous delivery and DevOps, and here with the aim to further maximize the customer value, or you could say exploit the opportunities provided by today's technology through software, through connectivity, and to provide a higher degree of value to the customer. And this also potentially opens up completely new business opportunities because of these abilities you might have in here. And the last two slides, I talked about the data and AI-driven product and service evolution, and about this ecosystem integration, where we really need to orchestrate this whole thing. So as I pointed out, this is not different things, and I think it's a lot more than buzzwords. It's really more a journey. And if I look at this, I would say it's something that spans back from 10 years in the past to probably at least 10 years in the future, what I just talked about, if you look at the whole picture. So this is the end of my talk. So thank you very much. I hope you could got some ideas and hopefully some inspirations out of it. And thanks again for inviting me here to present this. And I'm looking forward to the discussion, also your question. And here are my contact details. So of course, I'm also available on LinkedIn or via email. So I'm also happy to discuss this topic further or provide answers to any questions you might have on these topics in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Really interesting, and your summary was on point. Yeah, you talked about agility, about DevOps, continuous delivery, and this ecosystem integration. You mentioned also that you work a lot with industrial firms. Can you give us a hint, or can you explore a little, how far are industrial firms in those like 3 topics you just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this, you probably could expect it's not a one answer, but it's a very heterogeneous answer. As I pointed out, I think probably you can go to any company today and ask them, are you doing Agile? Especially if you ask the head of R&D, and they will answer, of course we do Agile. And this is true. I think it's not like 10 years ago that 50 or 80% of the industrial companies were only starting looking into this. So I think this is really something that people know what they are talking about. You don't have to explain them anymore why Agile is also relevant into a large industrial company. But I think probably the majority are really more on the way that they have implemented these Agile practices within teams, but they have not yet reached the state of an organization agility, and especially the boundary conditions provided, for example, in the budgeting or from the reporting on the whole organization level, they have not really changed. And this is the thing where I think today is really a big challenge, and this should be solved, I would say, hopefully as soon as possible to remain competitive. So this is on the Agile journey. On the DevOps journey, it's, I would say, a little bit different. I like to call it, we are today, if you talk about DevOps, in the buzzword phase. When I started 5 years ago in the industrial world, most people didn't know, especially managers, what I was talking about. I had a lot to do on convincing what is it. Today, I think management industrial companies said, yeah, DevOps seems to be important. I find something and delegate to do it, but it's not yet understood what is the impact that I try to point it out. So here, I think we are more in the beginning if you look at the overall industry. And this is something that I think, again, I would like to push forward more and more to really make the people aware what's behind this. And it's not about applying a new methodology. It's really about changing the way you're dealing with your products. And just quickly on the last topics, the data topics, I think this has to be seen twofold. There's, of course, a lot happening in data and AI, but what I was talking about, combining this with the fast feedback loop. And this is really something I would say is only utilized very scarcely by industrial companies. It's, of course, used a lot by Amazons and such. They use this extensively, this data analysis, to improve their product. But in our world, I think this is something that's hopefully starting or becoming more important soon.
Interesting. So does every organization need all those 3 topics? And when they start, how do they implement it? One after another? Can you do it in parallel? How do they do it?
Yeah, again, sort of short question is probably a longer answer. I mean, I think I try to make it clear that especially DevOps is a continuation or extension or evolution of the agile approach. So clearly you need to have these agile things implemented in order to also move forward with this continuous deployment. But this does not mean that you first have to spend the next 5 years to work on your agile part, and then you start to work on the DevOps part. So also you cannot do it with, let's say, the agile parts. If you have not yet really started with your agile part, these things can be done jointly. But if you already have started, and this is a case what many organizations have done with the agile, now by moving towards DevOps, you actually identify that you only have implemented agile to a certain extent, because the way it is implemented in most organizations, it actually means you are doing it to a certain extent, but not as far as enough as you can move towards these more frequent deployments. So the ambition to move even further kind of makes it more transparent that your agile implementation is only halfway through.